I sat on a wooden bench just outside Vanderbilt University Hospital, my hands clenched so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Around me, spring was alive, dogwoods in bloom, sunlight flickering off the glass windows, and people in scrubs or suits going about their lives. But none of it touched me. I might as well have been invisible. Inside that building, behind sterile walls, flickering monitors, and the mechanical beeping that haunted my sleep, my husband, Daniel Carter, was dying. They didn't say it in those exact words, not at first. Doctors like to speak in conditionals. If we don't find a match, if the treatment doesn't take, but I was a nurse. I knew the language of what goes unsaid. I had seen enough final moments to recognize when the fight was nearly over. It hadn't always been like this. Just 6 months ago, Daniel was lifting lumber in his workshop, whistling to music while building a custom armoire for a client. He had sawdust in his beard and a sparkle in his eyes. We'd talk about our dream vacation to Greece over reheated pizza, laugh about the neighbor's dog chasing squirrels, and whisper hopes of having kids one day, maybe even twins. I remember the way he'd rest his head on my shoulder as I read aloud in bed, saying, this right here is the life. He was my steady place. He made the chaos of the world quiet. And now, that same man could barely breathe on his own. It started with fatigue, something he blamed on long hours. Then came bruises on his arms and legs that he swore came from bumping into furniture. I watched him sleep one night, his chest rising unevenly, his breath shallow and short. I knew something was wrong long before the doctors confirmed it. Aplastic anemia. Severe. His bone marrow, the core of his life force, had simply quit. There's a treatment, they said. A bone marrow transplant. But he'll need a match. That's when the real horror began. Daniel didn't have any known family. He'd grown up in foster care, passed from home to home, always dreaming but never belonging. We signed him up for the National Registry, hoping a stranger might be the miracle we needed. But hope is a cruel thing when it comes with a countdown clock. The days blurred into each other. Blood transfusions, hospital visits, hopeful tests that ended in heartbreak. I would come home, collapse in our bathroom, and cry into a towel so he wouldn't hear me. I felt like I was watching him vanish in slow motion. Every morning before work, I would visit the hospital, kiss his forehead, and whisper lies like we've got this and you'll be home in no time. And every time I said it, I prayed that the universe would mistake my lie for a wish and make it come true. But I was unraveling. The woman I used to be, the hopeful, bright-eyed nurse, the loving wife, the optimist, was slipping away, replaced by someone mechanical and numb. I felt like I was living in a waiting room for grief. And Daniel, even at his weakest, he was still trying to make me feel better. He'd joke about the hospital food. He told me I needed a vacation from all the worrying. He even teased, maybe I'll come back looking good bald. He didn't see what I saw, the hollows under his eyes, the yellowing of his skin, the terrifying drop in his blood counts. He was fading. One night, he reached out, brushing his trembling fingers along my wrist, and said, if I don't make it, promise me you'll still go to Santorini. Wear that ridiculous sun hat you love, drink wine on the beach, and fall in love with the world again. I couldn't answer. I wanted to scream, how do you expect me to love anything without you in it? But all I could do was nod, the lump in my throat choking me. This morning, I needed air. I needed to step out before I shattered in front of him. That's how I ended up on that bench, watching the world move around me as mine crumbled. I pulled out my phone and stared at the lock screen, a photo of us on our 3rd anniversary. We were standing in front of the little wooden house he built nearly from scratch, me in his arms, laughing so hard I looked like I might fall over. He had that half smile, the one where only one corner of his mouth lifted, like he was always keeping a secret joke just for me. I missed that smile. I missed him. The man lying in the ICU wasn't Daniel. Not really. He was the echo of him. And I didn't know how much longer the echo would last. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me, casual chatter between two hospital workers on break. "You seen that guy in ICU, Carter?" one said, unwrapping a sandwich. "Swear to God, he looks just like this dude who works up in Pine Hollow. Could be his twin." I froze. Pine Hollow. My breath caught. My heart thudded. I sat perfectly still as their voices faded into the distance. It could be nothing. People looked like each other all the time. But still, a spark ignited in my chest, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. I sat there frozen, barely breathing, as the words replayed over and over in my head like a broken record. Looks just like this guy who works up in Pine Hollow. Pine Hollow. A town I hadn't thought about in years. Small, quiet, nestled in the Appalachian foothills about 2 hours east of Nashville. I'd only been there once, during my last year of nursing school for a rural health rotation. It was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and waved at strangers from their porches. I knew what I'd heard. The hospital staff didn't even realize I was listening. Their conversation had been light, casual, as if they were talking about the weather. But for me, it cracked open something I had sealed tight inside, a desperate yearning I'd tried to suppress for weeks. Could it be a coincidence? Of course. There are 7 billion people on this planet. Lookalikes exist. But Daniel didn't just have any face. His eyes were sharp and blue like glaciers, his smile crooked on one side like he was always halfway through a joke. The thought of someone else having those same features, it wasn't impossible. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't coincidental either. My hands trembled as I stood up from the bench. I walked back into the hospital, past the familiar scent of antiseptic and the buzzing fluorescent lights. I forced myself to move on autopilot, smile at the receptionist, nod to the nurses, walk down the long corridor to Daniel's room. He was sleeping when I arrived, his chest rising gently, his lips slightly parted. His face looked even paler under the hospital lights, but peaceful too, like he was dreaming of something far from here. I didn't wake him. Instead, I pulled a chair close, took his hand in mine, and sat in silence. My mind was already racing. If this man in Pine Hollow really did look like Daniel, what if he was more than a lookalike? What if he was family? Daniel had spent his life believing he was alone in the world. No parents, no siblings, just a string of foster homes and case files. When we talked about kids, he once told me, "I don't want them to feel what I felt, like you came from nowhere and belonged to no one." The ache in his voice that day had stuck with me. And now, what if he did belong to someone after all? I didn't tell him what I'd heard. I couldn't, not yet. What if I gave him hope only to crush it? He was clinging to life by a thread, and I couldn't afford to shake his foundation any more than it already was. But I could act. I waited until morning before I made my decision. I went to the nurse's station and filled out the emergency leave request form with shaking hands. My supervisor didn't ask many questions, just gave me a quiet nod and a warm hug. She knew Daniel's condition. Everyone in the ward did. I drove home and packed a bag like I was preparing for war. Toothbrush, clean clothes, my phone charger, a worn photo of Daniel and me from our trip to the Smokies 3 years ago. He was holding me from behind, our cheeks pressed together, both of us laughing like fools. I needed that image, needed to remember why I was doing this. Before leaving town, I stopped by the hospital once more. Daniel was awake this time, smiling faintly when he saw me. "You look like you're on a mission," he whispered hoarsely. "Maybe I am," I replied, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. He tried to sit up, curiosity blooming in his expression. "Where are you going?" "Just something I need to check out. I'll be back before you know it." "You're being mysterious." I leaned down and kissed him softly. "Just trust me, Danny." He didn't push. That was Daniel. Even when the world was collapsing around us, he let me hold the pieces the way I needed to. I turned and walked out of that hospital room with purpose burning in my chest. I didn't have a name. I didn't even have a photograph. All I had was a hunch and a town, and a voice inside me screaming that maybe, just maybe, this time hope wouldn't lead me to another dead end. I pulled onto the highway heading east, into the rising sun, toward a town called Pine Hollow, and toward the possibility that somewhere out there, someone might hold the key to saving Daniel's life. The sun was just cresting over the horizon as I drove eastward, the familiar skyline of Nashville slowly vanishing in my rearview mirror. The roads became quieter, trading honking horns and coffee shop chatter for winding two-lane stretches framed by tall pine trees and the occasional white-fenced farm. I had no clear plan. Just a name, Pine Hollow, and a fragile thread of hope stitched together by a stranger's offhand comment. But I clung to that thread like it was the last rope keeping me from falling into despair. My phone sat in the passenger seat, Daniel's picture pulled up on the screen like a compass. I kept glancing at it, not because I could forget his face, but because it gave me courage. His half-smile, those glacier blue eyes, the way he crinkled his nose when laughing. I knew them like my own heartbeat. If someone else had those eyes, that same crooked grin, then maybe, just maybe, they shared something deeper. Something written in blood. About 2 hours in, I passed an old wooden sign that read "Welcome to Pine Hollow, EST 1883. Below it, hand-painted wildflowers danced along the bottom, faded from sun and time. I rolled down my window. The air was different here, crisper, quieter. Slower. I parked in front of a general store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The porch sagged slightly, and the rocking chairs out front creaked in the morning breeze. Inside, a brass bell jingled as I pushed open the door. It smelled like sawdust, tobacco, and something sweet, maybe apple preserves. A man behind the counter, gray-bearded and wearing a flannel shirt, looked up from stocking shelves. "Morning," he said kindly. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for someone. I don't know his name, but people say he looks like this." I held up my phone with the photo of Daniel. "He works around here. Maybe you've seen him?" The man squinted at the screen, then blinked hard. "Well, I'll be. That's Luke Henderson you're talking about. Lives out past County Road 6, near the cornfields. He comes in here every Friday for black coffee and nails." Luke. My stomach tightened. I hadn't expected it to be that easy. Somehow, I thought there'd be more wandering, more blind asking. But now, the road to Daniel's potential salvation had a name. A house. A direction. "Could you give me directions?" I asked, barely containing the shake in my voice. "Sure thing. Take a left out of here, follow the road till the third fork, then stay right. There's a mailbox with Henderson painted in white. Can't miss it." I thanked him and stepped outside, the bell jingling again as the door shut behind me. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I followed the instructions. The paved road soon turned into gravel, and then into something that felt like a memory, quiet, bumpy, and edged with wildflowers. The mailbox came into view. Henderson, faded but legible. The house beyond was modest, weathered wood siding, a metal roof, a front porch cluttered with boots, a rusted swing swaying gently in the breeze. A barking dog appeared from behind the side, then quieted when it saw me didn't mean harm. I parked the car and stepped out, heart hammering like a drumline in my chest. I could have driven away. I could have convinced myself it was a long shot, a coincidence, a dream. But then I remembered Daniel, his voice in the dark saying, "Just one more chance, Em. That's all I need." The porch steps creaked under my weight as I climbed them. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. After a pause, the door opened. A man stood in the doorway. Taller than Daniel, broader too, but there was something in the tilt of his jaw, the shape of his brow, the intense blue of his eyes, that made the air leave my lungs. He blinked at me. "Can I help you?" His voice was cautious but not unfriendly. Deep. Like someone who didn't speak more than he needed to. I swallowed, realizing suddenly that I had no idea what to say. How do you explain to a stranger that he might be your dying husband's only hope? I held out my phone, hands shaking. This is my husband. His name is Daniel Carter. He's in the ICU at Vanderbilt. People said you looked like him. I came here because, well, I think you might be related. He stared at the screen for a long time. Too long. His eyes darkened, his lips parted. Well, I'll be damned. I barely heard him whisper, "He looks like my mother." Then he looked back up at me, this time softer, gentler. "Who are you?" "I'm Emily," I said, voice breaking. "Daniel's wife." He nodded slowly. "You better come in." The door clicked shut behind me with a low groan, and suddenly I was standing in the middle of a life I knew nothing about. The house was simple, worn wood floors, mismatched furniture, and a faint scent of coffee and motor oil clinging to the air. A ticking wall clock marked the silence between us. Luke gestured toward a faded plaid armchair. "Sit. Please." I sank into the seat, my hands still trembling in my lap. He sat across from me on the edge of a wooden dining chair, elbows resting on his knees, studying the photo of Daniel again like it held a secret he'd waited years to unlock. "I think," he began, then stopped, raking a hand through his unkempt hair. "I think he might be my brother." The words landed in the room like thunder, soft but undeniable. I swallowed hard. "Can you tell me why you think that?" Luke leaned back slowly, his eyes clouding with memory. "Our mom, she wasn't what you'd call stable. She had 5 kids by the time she was 30. Different fathers. No real roots. When I was about 6 or 7, she gave birth to another boy. I remember the hospital, bright lights, nurses with kind eyes, the smell of bleach." He paused. "But I also remember her saying she wasn't keeping him. Said one more mouth to feed would break her. I didn't understand what that meant at the time. I just knew I never saw that baby again." A chill ran down my spine. "She signed him over at the hospital," Luke continued, voice tight. "Told us all to forget it. That he never happened. But I didn't. I couldn't. I used to lay in bed and wonder what happened to him. If he had a family. If he was okay." My throat closed with emotion. He grew up in foster care. Never knew his parents. Always wondered if there was someone out there who looked like him. Someone who might love him just because. Luke's jaw tightened. Damn. He stood suddenly, pacing the small living room, then stopping at the window to stare out into the field beyond. All this time. I never knew his name. Not until now. I rose to my feet slowly, watching him. "Luke. Daniel is dying." He turned toward me, his face pale. "He has aplastic anemia. His body can't make blood anymore. He needs a bone marrow transplant to survive. But he doesn't have family. Or at least, he thought he didn't." Luke's breath caught. His eyes darted to the photo on my phone again. "I didn't come here to pressure you," I said quietly. "I don't even know if you're a match. But I had to try. Because if there's even the smallest chance you could help him, I had to find you." Luke didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." I blinked. You will?" "I don't need a test to tell me he's my brother. I see it. I feel it." He grabbed a worn baseball cap from a hook by the door. "If there's a chance I can save him, even a small one, I'm in." His conviction stunned me. I'd expected resistance, confusion, questions. Not this quiet certainty. Not this fierce sense of duty from a man who barely knew us. "Do you want to pack a bag?" I asked. He shook his head. Don't need much. I'll follow you in my truck. We left Pine Hollow just as the rain began to fall, a soft, steady drizzle that turned the landscape into a blur of greens and grays. Luke's old pickup rumbled behind me the entire way, steady and unwavering. Just like him. By the time we reached Vanderbilt, dusk had settled over the city. I led Luke through the long, sterile corridors I had walked 1,000 times before. But this time, the air felt different, charged with something like hope. Daniel was awake, propped up by pillows, pale but alert. His eyes lit up when he saw me, then narrowed in confusion when he spotted the stranger at my side. I stepped forward. Danny, this is Luke. He thinks he's your brother. Daniel stared. His mouth opened slightly, eyes moving between us as if trying to make sense of a dream. Luke spoke first. I know this is sudden, man. But I think we share more than just a resemblance. There was silence. Heavy, stretching between them like a bridge they hadn't dared to cross yet. Then Daniel whispered, my brother? Luke nodded, eyes glistening. Yeah. If you'll have me. Daniel reached out with a trembling hand, and Luke took it firmly. For a long time, none of us spoke. We just let the weight of it settle, the years lost, the miracle found, the fragile tether of blood and fate pulling them together at last. Later that night, the hematologist rushed into the waiting room holding a printout in her hand. He's a match, she said, eyes wide. A strong one. One of the best we've seen in a while. I nearly collapsed from relief. Luke turned to me, stunned. You hear that? I nodded, tears streaking down my face. You're going to save him. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. The days that followed moved both painfully slow and blindingly fast. It was as if time had fractured, stretching when I stared at the ceiling at night, praying for Daniel to hold on, and collapsing in on itself the moment Luke's compatibility test came back. He's a strong match, the hematologist had said, her voice filled with the kind of cautious optimism you rarely hear in hospital corridors. One of the strongest we've seen this year. The news hit like oxygen in a drowning world. Daniel cried when I told him. Not big, theatrical tears, but quiet ones that slid down his cheeks while he stared out the window. I never thought I'd find family, he whispered. Much less that family would save my life. Luke tried to keep things light. Well, he joked, now you're stuck with me. I hope you like bad coffee, country music, and someone who talks to his truck like it's a person. Daniel chuckled weakly, the sound raspy but real. That sounds perfect. The transplant was scheduled quickly. Daniel's condition was deteriorating faster than expected, and the doctors didn't want to waste a single hour. Preparations began almost immediately, rounds of chemo to destroy what was left of his failing marrow, countless vials of blood drawn, forms signed, consents given. Luke took it all in stride. He didn't flinch when the nurses explained the procedure, didn't hesitate when they warned him of the risks. He simply nodded, rolled up his sleeves, and said, let's do this. The morning of the transplant, Luke was sitting in a blue hospital gown, hooked up to a machine, cracking jokes with the staff like he'd done this a dozen times. Never thought I'd be donating part of myself to a guy I met 2 days ago, he said with a grin. But hey, turns out he's my brother. So I guess that makes it more meaningful. I smiled through tears as I sat beside Daniel, whose body looked so frail now it scared me. But his eyes, they were brighter. He was holding on. During the transplant, I paced the hallway outside, unable to sit still. Each second felt like a cliff edge. I found myself whispering Daniel's name like a mantra. Over and over. Like if I just said it enough times, it would tether him to this world. Hours passed. Then finally, a nurse opened the door and nodded. It's done. He's resting. I stepped into Daniel's room. He was pale, still, with 4 lines running from his arms like threads in a tapestry of survival. But something had shifted. The machine hummed its steady rhythm, and his breathing, though slow, sounded stronger. Luke came in later, tired but calm. His hair was damp with sweat, but he looked proud. "He's gonna make it," he said, almost like a promise. "I can feel it." Daniel stirred, eyes fluttering open. When he saw Luke, he managed a smile. "You just gave me a second chance." Luke stepped closer and grasped his hand. "And you gave me something I never knew I needed, family." There were no more words after that, just the quiet exchange of strength between 2 men bound by more than blood now. They were brothers not only by DNA but by choice, by sacrifice. The days after the transplant were a test of patience and faith. We waited for signs. Subtle changes, the faintest signs that Daniel's body was accepting the transplant. Every morning I'd lean in close, searching his face for color, listening to his voice for steadiness, holding his hand to feel warmth returning. And slowly, it happened. The shadows beneath his eyes began to fade. He started asking for solid food. He laughed at a nurse's bad pun. One morning, I found him watching the sunrise through the hospital window, his face calm. "I forgot how beautiful mornings could be," he murmured. Luke remained close. The hospital wouldn't allow him to sleep in Daniel's room, so he took over the pull-out chair in the waiting area. Every evening, I brought him coffee and we'd sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes not. Just being there. One night, I found him standing at the glass, watching Daniel sleep. "He's really my brother," he said softly, more to himself than to me. "You saved him," I whispered. "No," Luke replied. "We saved each other." In that moment, I understood something deeper. This wasn't just a medical procedure. It wasn't just cells being transferred from one person to another. This was life rebuilding itself, through connection, through courage, through love. Daniel's laugh slowly returned, along with the strength in his hands and the sparkle in his eyes. He began to sketch furniture designs again on scraps of paper, a sure sign that the man I knew, the man I loved, was coming back. And every time Luke walked into the room, Daniel would light up just a little more. Their bond was raw, new, and still growing, but it was real. The transplant had given Daniel another chance. But it had also done something else, something none of us could have planned for. It gave us all a family. Autumn came to Nashville like a slow exhale, trees igniting in gold and crimson, the air growing crisp, and porch steps dusted with fallen leaves. Daniel had been home for 2 weeks. Home. I hadn't said that word with full conviction in months. But now, with Daniel sleeping soundly in our shared bed again, with the steady hum of his breathing and the faint creak of the old house settling around us, I finally believed it. He was really here. We both were. The transplant had worked. Daniel's body accepted Luke's marrow like it had been waiting for it all along. Each day brought small victories, standing without assistance, walking down the hall, eating a full meal without nausea. His skin regained its warmth, and the gray shadows under his eyes lightened. But more than that, he smiled again, not the weak, careful smile he wore in the hospital, but the genuine, mischievous kind that made me fall in love with him in the first place. And Luke, he became part of our lives like he had always belonged. He parked his old pickup just outside the fence and stayed in our guest room at first, but soon it became obvious, he wasn't just visiting. He was home, too. On Sundays, we shared dinner on the porch, usually something simple, roasted chicken or Daniel's favorite chile. We'd light a few candles, let the breeze in, and laugh. Real laughter. The kind that feels like wind shaking loose something heavy inside your chest. Sometimes, I'd catch Luke and Daniel talking quietly out back, Daniel sitting in the rocking chair Luke helped restore, both men looking out at the trees, sharing stories about their fractured childhoods. Daniel remembered foster homes. Luke remembered their mother's volatile moods. Slowly, they started stitching their separate memories into a shared past. One afternoon, Luke handed Daniel a small, weathered pocketknife. "This was our father's," he said quietly. "The only thing Mom didn't pawn." Daniel held it with trembling hands, turning it over slowly, like it might vanish if he blinked. "I never thought I'd have anything of his," he whispered. Now he had more than an object. He had a brother. The town of Pine Hollow, upon hearing what happened, sent letters and casseroles. Some of the locals even signed a card with a photo of the general store, scribbled with notes like "Welcome to the family" and "Don't forget your roots." I cried reading each one. One evening, Daniel surprised me. He led me outside, his steps still a bit slow, but steady. There, on the porch, stood a brand-new rocking chair, built by his own hands. The wood gleamed with fresh varnish, the design familiar but more intricate than the original. "For you," he said simply. "So we can sit side by side again." I sat, tears brimming. The chair creaked as I rocked, and the sound was beautiful, soft, steady, alive. We talked about things we hadn't dared to before: the fear, the nights he thought he wouldn't wake up, the guilt he felt for being the one who needed saving. "You didn't burden us," I told him. "You brought us together." He leaned his head against mine. "I used to think being an orphan meant I'd always be alone. But I was wrong. You have us now," I whispered. "You always did. You just hadn't found us yet." A few weeks later, we drove to Pine Hollow together, me, Daniel, and Luke. It wasn't for anything urgent. No hospitals. No panic. Just a visit. The trees there were ablaze in color. The wind smelled of earth and firewood. As we walked through town, Daniel was greeted like a long-lost relative. A little girl. Luke's best friend's daughter climbed onto Luke's shoulders, squealing with laughter while Daniel grinned beside them. We walked down a tree-lined path near the river, golden leaves falling like quiet blessings around us. "This," Daniel said, gently squeezing my hand, "this feels like beginning again." I looked at him, really looked, at the man I almost lost, at the brother he'd found, at the future we thought we'd never see, and I realized something. Grief hadn't disappeared. It never truly does. But something had taken its place: peace. That night, around a small bonfire behind Luke's house, we sat wrapped in blankets, sipping cider, the fire crackling between us. The stars above were so clear they looked close enough to touch. Daniel leaned over and kissed my temple. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you more," I replied, as I always had. Luke smiled at us, poking the fire with a stick. "You two are ridiculous." "Get used to it," Daniel teased. "You're stuck with us." And we laughed, full and free. Our story didn't end in the ICU. It didn't end in fear or in goodbyes whispered through tears. It ended here, on a porch, by a fire, in the arms of family. Or maybe, it didn't end at all. Maybe it just began again. In a world often defined by uncertainty and loss, this story reminds us of the enduring power of love, loyalty, and the quiet courage it takes to hope when all seems lost. Emily's unwavering devotion to Daniel, even in the darkest hours, showed that love isn't just about staying, it's about fighting, searching, and believing when no one else does. Luke's willingness to help a stranger, who turned out to be his brother, revealed the strength of truth and the instinctive pull of blood and belonging. And Daniel, who once believed he had no family, learned that sometimes the people you're meant to find are waiting just beyond the edge of despair. What resonates most is this: family is not always something you're born into. Sometimes, it's built through choices, through sacrifice, and through acts of extraordinary kindness. Healing, too, is rarely quick or easy. It often begins in the small, unspoken moments. In a rocking chair on a porch, a shared laugh after long silence, or a hand held through the night. In the end, this story leaves us with a truth both simple and profound. Life doesn't always give us what we expect, but sometimes, it gives us exactly what we need.